The stars had betrayed me. In their cold, indifferent light, I once dreamed of dominion, of weaving the currents of fate into a tapestry that even Zinch would envy. Now, on Ziphos 4, a world reduced to ash and ruin, I understood the harsh truth. The universe does not bend to ambition, nor does it bow to chaos. It devours, and I had become prey. I could hear them long before I saw them. A distant, rasping chorus that twisted the air, a symphony of gnashing teeth and alien hunger, like 1,000 voices crying for blood. Then the tremor of chitin against stone, the wet, gut-wrenching sound of flesh being shredded. The Tyranids had arrived. Their swarms were endless, adaptive, and utterly alien. My magic faltered in the face of them. Spells that could annihilate entire battalions of men splintered into smoke against their bioforms, and yet I survived. For now, each step across the ruined city was a gamble, each breath a countdown to oblivion. But the warp pulsed through my veins, a dim hum of potential, a whisper of possibility. Adapt, survive, manipulate said, and I obeyed. I was no longer a sorcerer seeking power. I was a hunter surviving in the teeth of the devourer. The screams of my fallen warband haunted me. Karthus the Red, my brother in arms and fellow disciple of Sinech, had called demonic tides to hold the Tyranids at bay. He died screaming, torn asunder by the claws of a Carnifex that moved with brutal intelligence. Others fled into the night, leaving me to navigate the ruins alone. The warp storms we conjured slowed the creatures only for a heartbeat. They adapted, always. I found shelter in a shattered cathedral, its spires broken, walls scorched and pitted with Tyranid acid. The air stank of burnt incense and decay. Kneeling, I whispered to the Immaterium, feeling the currents of raw energy scrape against my consciousness. A dangerous thought formed. If I could tether a fragment of the Tyranid Hive Mind to my will, subtly, I might bend its instincts to my advantage. Madness, or genius sometimes, they are one and the same. Dawn came with the screeching of termagants bursting through shattered doors. I raised my staff, eyes glowing, and unleashed bolts of warp fire. Blue flames licked across chitin and flesh, but more came. My illusions, copies of myself flickering across the hall, deed them, but only for moments. I fled through smoke-choked streets, the cries of the dead echoing behind me, weaving between collapsed columns and craters. Above, a Hive Tyrant glided, wings slicing the air, eyes probing my mind. Its psychic presence was a hammer against my consciousness, yet I forced focus. Survival demanded cunning. Days blurred into nights. Each encounter was a gambit. I stalked Imperial guardsmen, pale with fear, plotting escape or praying for salvation. I manipulated them with whispers and illusions, guiding them to distract the swarm. They were tools, expendable, yet useful. I learned to use the Tyranids against themselves, drawing them into traps and killing zones. But every victory exacted a toll both on my body and my mind. One night, I came upon a small outpost besieged by Homagons. Blades of chitin gleamed in torchlight, creatures twitching and skittering with terrifying speed. The guardsmen fired blindly. The terror made them predictable. I appeared as a ghost, eyes glowing with warp energy, and whispered directions to them, sowing confusion among their attackers. Explosions lit the night as I cast minor spells, sending spectral doubles into the horde to mislead them. For the first time, survival felt possible, not just for me, but for those I manipulated. Yet, every life I saved drained the warp from my body, gnawed at my soul. Weakness could mean death, the Hive Mind noticed. At first, subtle probing, a shadow at the edge of awareness. Then psychic assaults, waves of terror that fractured my perceptions. Visions of being devoured alive, dissolved into alien biomass. The Tyranids were learning, adapting to my methods, and I understood that my gambles had become battles for every heartbeat. And then came the Patriarch. Towering, grotesque, claws-like size, eyes alight with alien intelligence, moved with purpose, a predator with awareness beyond instinct. I fled, weaving through ruined corridors, casting illusions to slow its advance, igniting warp fire in choke points. My heart hammered in my chest as it probed my mind, testing every thought. Every hesitation would be fatal. The first confrontation was chaos incarnate. I opened a warp rift beneath its feet, a gamble of desperation. The explosion tore through the Patriarch, yet the Hive Mind adapted instantly. Blood guards rallied. I realized then, survival was no longer about raw power. It was about cunning, deception, anticipation. Each step, each spell, each breath must outthink the enemy, or I would die. Weeks passed in endless rhythm. I became a shadow, a ghost across the battlefield. Tyranid patrols were lured into traps. Terrain became weapon. Instincts were manipulated. Every encounter honed me, forged me into a predator, stalking a predator. Imperial survivors became instruments of strategy, decoys, guides, pawns. They whispered prayers to the Emperor, oblivious to my presence, yet crucial to the war one waged against instinct and hunger. The next major clash occurred in the industrial sector. High fleet bioforms poured from tunnels and collapsed buildings. Tanks had been destroyed, artillery silenced. I drew upon the warp like a tidal wave, sending bolts of pure energy through streets, igniting walls, creating illusions to fragment the swarm. I felt the Patriarch directing the horde, a psychic conductor orchestrating death. A group of guardsmen attempted a charge. Brave, foolish I could not distinguish. I allowed them, guiding them into positions that drew the Tyranids into warp traps. Explosions ripped the night, screams echoed. For a moment, I felt control, the thrill of survival against impossible odds. The Patriarch appeared again, flanked by Lictors, whose stealth challenged even my senses. I hid, cloaking myself in the warp, letting the Tyranids advance into illusions and collapsing buildings. Each strike I launched was precise, designed to delay, confuse, and terrify. Hours passed. The city became my chessboard. Madness clawed at my mind, whispers of power tempting surrender. I resisted. Survival required clarity, not indulgence. The climactic confrontation came in the heart of the industrial complex. The Patriarch led a horde, psychic presence, a tidal wave, threatening to crush my mind. I unleashed all remaining power. Walls of fire, rifts of chaos, spectral duplicates. The Patriarch faltered, just for a heartbeat. I struck, opening a warp rift that consumed it. The swarm faltered, confused, the hive mind recoiling. Silence fell. I survived, alone, against the impossible. But survival was hollow. My warband was gone. The Hive fleet would return. Imperial forces would arrive, seeking remnants. Death was postponed, not avoided. Power is fleeting. Survival is a cycle of unending peril. I had become more than a sorcerer. I was a ghost in the warp, a predator glimpsing the teeth of the devourer and living. Would you survive this nightmare? Few could, and yet, here I stand, alone, surviving. The Tyranids will return. They always do. When they do, I will wait, watch, manipulate, a chaos sorcerer amid the end of all things, knowing cunning is power, and survival is the greatest victory of all. In the grim darkness of the far future, that is all any of us can hope for. The industrial ruins stretched like a graveyard of steel and fire. Smoke curled from collapsed factories, and the scent of charred flesh mixed with the acid temps of Tyranid residue. I moved like a shadow, staff in hand, eyes scanning for the faintest movement. The warp hummed in my veins, urging me onward, warning me. Every instinct screamed danger. Every sense was sharpened to a blade. Ahead, a squad of Genestealers skulked through the shadows, talons glinting in the flickering firelight. Their eyes were bright with alien cunning, the intelligence of the hive mind condensed into every sinew. I whispered, a minor illusion, creating duplicates of myself, weaving between the steel beams. The creatures paused, sniffing the air, uncertain which was real. A single misstep, and I would be shredded before the warp could protect me. I darted between pillars, summoning fire to collapse a walkway above them. Screams echoed as the steel fell, crushing some, scattering the rest. But more came termagants, warriors, and lurking lictors, silent and deadly, emerging from fissures in the concrete. I leaped into shadow, using warp-suppressed cloaking to vanish from their senses. Every heartbeat was a gamble, a step closer to either survival or annihilation. The Imperial guardsmen I had guided earlier appeared, trembling, terrified, yet alive. They had learned to trust my subtle commands. Now they were instruments, firing into the Tyranid ranks and my direction. I whispered tactical instructions, guiding their fire, turning their panic into a deadly precision. Bolters cracked, explosions ripped through the ruins, and the air was thick with smoke, dust, and psychic energy. The Hive Tyrant descended, wings slicing the air, its psychic presence battering my mind. I staggered, almost falling, as visions of devouring biomass, of being pulled into the endless maw of the hive mind, assaulted my senses. I forced focus, letting Sinch guide my thoughts. A wall of warp fire erupted around me, repelling lictors and genestealers, buying me precious moments to maneuver. Every spell I cast drained my body, burning flesh and spirit alike. My robes were tattered, my skin scorched by psychic feedback, yet I endured. I was learning to channel fear into power, desperation into cunning. The Tyranids were adaptive, yes, but they were predictable in their hunger, their drive to devour. I manipulated that drive, drawing them into collapsing structures, illusionary traps, and rifts of warp energy that shredded biomass with unholy precision. Hours blurred into one endless, grim night. Ka began to hear whispers not from the warp, but from the creatures themselves, in fleeting psychic echoes. The hive mind tested me, probed for weaknesses. The Patriarch, relentless and intelligent, coordinated the swarm with terrifying precision. Each genestealer seemed to move in tandem with my own heartbeat, responding to instinct I could almost sense. Was as if the swarm were learning not only from experience, but from me. Then, amidst the chaos, a faint hope. A group of guardsmen had taken cover in a partially intact factory. They looked to me, eyes wide with fear, expecting leadership, guidance, perhaps salvation. I whispered a command, a subtle manipulation of perception, and they emerged, bolters blazing, and their fire, guided with precision by my psychic direction, tore into the advancing swarm. I let them think themselves heroes. They would survive longer if they believed that. The Patriarch emerged from the wreckage, more massive, more terrifying than ever. Claws gleaming, eyes burning with alien intelligence. It charged with deliberate purpose. I flung myself into shadow, summoning illusions that flickered like broken mirrors across the battlefield. The Tyranids hesitated, confused by the spectral copies. I struck with fire and warp rifts, psychic energy lancing through their ranks, creating temporary chaos. And yet I knew this was not victory. Survival was temporary, fleeting, a single breath in an endless storm. My hive mind was learning. It adapted to every trick, every illusion, every trap. One misstep and the devouring tide would engulf me. I found a vantage point in a crumbling skyscraper, the steel frame groaning beneath my weight. From there, I could see the scale of the invasion, thousands of Tyranids advancing. Twisting through streets and shattered avenues, the air alive with chittering, screeching, the wet slap of flesh on stone. I whispered to the warp, feeling its pulse, its hunger, and I understood something terrifying. Raw power alone would not save me. I needed cunning, strategy, patience, and the ability to embrace the madness without losing myself to it. I began laying traps, warp rifts, disguised as rubble, illusions of myself in multiple locations, collapsing scaffolds and fire streams designed to fragment the horde. Every encounter was a test, a gamble, and the cost was exhaustion, mental strain, and creeping despair. Yet I endured, learning to turn fear into a weapon to manipulate both the living and the alien swarm as tools for my survival. Then came the ultimate test, the Patriarch, leading a swarm of Bloodguard, flanked by Lictors and Carnifexes. Its psychic presence assaulted my mind, a tidal wave of alien intelligence, probing, testing, seeking my weakness. I let it fill my despair, my fatigue, and then struck not with raw force, but with cunning. I drew upon the Hive Mind's own instincts, turning their hunger against them. The Bloodguard faltered, Lictors collided in confusion, and the Patriarch hesitated a momentary crack in the armor of instinct and purpose. I seized it. Warp energy flared, a rift opening beneath the monstrous creature. Reality buckled, tearing flesh, chitin, and mind into the immaterium. The Hive Mind recoiled, uncertain, the swarm faltering in confusion. Silence fell across the ruins, thick, suffocating, punctuated only by the ragged breathing of survivors and the faint, wet hiss of acid residue. I survived, alone, against the impossible. Yet, survival was hollow. My warband was gone, the city a graveyard, the Hive fleet only temporarily disrupted. The Imperium would come seeking remnants, and the Tyranids would return, stronger, more adaptive. Death was postponed, not avoided. A power was fleeting. Survival was a cycle of unending peril. I had become more than a sorcerer, was a ghost in the warp, a predator who had glimpsed the teeth of the devourer and lived. Would you survive this nightmare? Could you walk amid horrors that do not reason, that consume endlessly, that learn from every failure? Few could. And yet, here I stand, alone, surviving. The Tyranids will return. They always do. When they do, I will wait, watch, manipulate, a Chaos Sorcerer amid the end of all things, knowing cunning is power, and survival is the greatest victory of all. In the grim darkness of the far future, that is all any of us can hope for. The final night was a symphony of fire and blood. The ruined city had become a maze of collapsing streets, shattered buildings, and the twisted remains of one-sprout war machines. The Tyranids advanced relentlessly, a tide of chitin and fangs that ignored pain, death, or despair. Above, the Hive Tyrant circled, its psychic presence like a hammer against my consciousness, probing every thought, testing every instinct. I moved like a shadow, my staff crackling with warp energy, each step calculated, each breath a gamble. My robes were tattered, singed by warp fire and scorched by psychic feedback. My flesh bore countless scars, yet I endured. Madness clawed at my mind, whispers from the warp offering power in exchange for surrender. I refused. Survival demanded clarity, cunning, and the willingness to embrace the darkness without being consumed. From the rooftops, I observed the swarm. Carnifexes smashed through barricades, Lictors stalked through alleys, and swarms of termagants filled every avenue, their instinctive hunger directed with terrifying precision. I had learned to manipulate them subtly, turning instinct into weapon, guiding the horde through traps of my design. But the Hive Mind was learning, adapting, anticipating my moves. Every encounter tested my wits and endurance. The Imperials, the few survivors I had guided, were preparing for one final stand. They looked to me, terrified and desperate for direction. I whispered strategies, illusions, and subtle psychic nudges. Bolt of fire roared, explosions shattered walls, and the air was thick with smoke, acid, and the screams of the dying. Every shot, every explosion was orchestrated to maximize confusion among the Tyranids. Then the Patriarch appeared, massive and horrifying, its claws glinting in the fires of ruin. flanked by Bloodguard and Lictors. It moved with terrifying intelligence. Its psychic presence crashed over me like a wave, forcing me to my knees. Yet, I rose again. Driven by desperation and the teachings of Tzinch, I cast every spell I could muster. Walls of fire, warp rifts, illusions that fractured the battlefield into impossible geometries. The Patriarch faltered not from power, but from cunning. I had turned its own instincts against it, guiding its horde into traps, feeding confusion into the Hive Mind itself. I seized the moment. Warp energy surged through me, rifts opening beneath its feet, reality tearing at its massive frame. Screams of alien agony echoed, yet the swarm adapted instantly, the Hive Mind recoiling, but learning. The battle was not over. Lictors emerged from shadows, striking at my position with lethal precision. Genistillers lunged from broken corridors, their talons seeking to rend flesh and warp energy alike. I moved with unnatural speed, warp fire lancing through ranks of the deadliest creatures, illusions distracting, collapsing structures crushing, until the city itself became my weapon. Hours passed in a blur of fire, chittering, psychic echoes, and screams. The survivors followed my guidance, bolters tearing into the horde, and I became the fulcrum upon which the tide of battle balanced. Every victory came at a cost: exhaustion, psychic strain, and the creeping horror of the warp whispering temptations I could barely resist. Finally, the Hive Tyrant descended for a direct confrontation, wings slicing through smoke and fire, claws gleaming with lethal grace. It projected its psychic will directly at me. I staggered, nearly falling as visions of consumption, assimilation, and endless hunger assaulted my mind. I gritted my teeth, channeling the warp with precision, forcing every ounce of cunning, every trick, every illusion into a single moment of desperate action. The climactic confrontation was brutal, a ballet of destruction. I opened rifts beneath the Hive Tyrant's massive frame, striking with warp bolts that seared chitin and flesh alike. Spectral duplicates flickered across the battlefield, confusing the horde. The Patriarch and its Bloodguard attacked simultaneously, but I had learned their patterns, predicted their instincts, manipulated their perceptions. Every strike, every step was calculated. Every illusion, every trap was timed to perfection. Finally, I struck the decisive blow. A warp rift tore through the Patriarch and Hive Tyrant alike, sucking in biomass, chitin, and psychic energy, leaving only silence. The swarm faltered, disoriented, the Hive Mind momentarily recoiling. I stood alone amid the ruins, breathing raggedly, body trembling, robes tattered and scorched. I had survived. Against the impossible, I had survived. But victory was hollow. My warband was gone, the city a graveyard of steel and flesh. The Hive fleet would return, stronger, more adaptive. Imperial forces would arrive, seeking remnants of the alien threat. Death had been postponed, power was fleeting, and survival was but a momentary triumph in an unending cycle of peril. I had become more than a sorcerer. I was a ghost in the warp, a predator who had glimpsed the teeth of the devourer and lived. The warp whispered, the Hive Mind watched, and yet I endured. Would you survive this nightmare, reader? Could you walk amid horrors that do not reason, that consume endlessly, that learn from every failure? Few could. And yet, here I stand, alone, surviving. The Tyranids will return. They always do. When they return, I will wait, watch, manipulate, a Chaos Sorcerer amid the end of all things, knowing that cunning is power and survival is the greatest victory of all. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. But if you can endure, if you can outthink the devourer, if you can embrace the darkness without surrendering, then perhaps survival is possible. Not glory, not honor, not peace, but survival. And in that survival, even in the face of the Hive Mind's relentless hunger, I have found the only victory that matters.